We are back with you once again on another Johnny Torch program number 265, and this is a comic creator chat, which we haven't done in a while. And we're talking about that age old topic that rears its ugly head every now and again, and that is criticism. Think you can take it? Can you take it? Should you take it? Do you need to take it, really, to be honest with you? And it seems like in the indie comic sphere, there's always somebody criticizing somebody else. There's always somebody critiquing other people's work. There's always people who are offering to critique your books and your artwork. I don't know. I mean, this is a question that comes up from time to time. I think I've done a comic chat. I've done some comic chats before that kind of dealt with the subject. I mean, I did the perfect pitch and how criticism affects you, and then I did another video about perfectionism where there's this unusual drive for people to want to be perfect. And it all kind of stems from the same topic, which is criticism and who are we trying to please with what we're doing. And I'm of the firm opinion, and anybody who's listened to me any length of time talk about the subject of comics, I believe that comics are an art form, and all art is subjective. And the art should, it should represent what the artist is trying to say. Now, I don't really know how you critique that. You know what I mean? There is certain things, and I know the people that ask for a critique or are trying to offer critiques usually are trying to do it for the betterment of the artist, of the art, of the book, because they want to get into some lofty publishing company. I want to work for DC. I want to work for Marvel. I want to work for, Image or whatever else is out there. And it's like, how do I get in the door? How do I get the big companies to look at me? I have to make sure it looks like them in order for them to take me seriously. And I mean, it's different for me, I suppose, because I don't really care to work for a big company. And I'm a cartoonist. That's a little bit different. I understand the people that want to work old school. They want to look like they're doing books like, come from the old days of comics and do it in that style. But, when you're doing cartooning, it's different. It's like the difference between cartooning and the old school comic artist is that the cartoonist does everything themselves. And I kind of pride myself on doing everything myself. And that goes back to, like, the newspaper strips starting in, I don't know when they started, the 20s, the 30s, probably the teens maybe. And the idea was, what you did it all yourself, and you didn't farm it out to different people to do different things. Of course, when the comics came out, that was, cemented in the 30s and so forth. That's when you had other jobs delegated to other people. And then we got this idea in our head that we had to do that in comics. We had to give everybody a job, and everybody had a different job to do, and everybody had to excel at that job. And of course, like I said, that's what made corporate comics. To me, that's not indie comics. Indie comics is not, you're not supposed to, or at least you don't have to, hire somebody for every job role. Hire, multiple creators, try to make it look like some kind of industry standard. To me, that's not the spirit of indie comics. To me, that's not the spirit of being an artist. That's, in a way, you're trying to create a product that, is going to be competitive with other titles. And I can understand the appeal of that. And I can understand because, you know, the more, at least in my opinion, the more hands you put on the wheel, the more difficult it is to steer the ship. And that's why you have so many, even classic characters and stories and whatever. There's always the division of, well, who did what? And everybody's a co-creator now, and everybody had something to do with every single character and important story in history. And it's very few and far between where you get a one cohesive creator and someone that'll take the credit for everything now, because that's kind of what comics have become. And that's not necessarily what I do it for. Now, criticism, when you think about it, I mean, I can understand constructive criticism. I mean, some people, I think Neil Adams, I remember there's stories of Neil Adams that, they went to him, of course, while he was alive, and wanted to be criticized about their drawing and stuff, and he would savage them and be like, this is completely wrong, and this is and I can understand, hoping that you're going to get someone to give you some advice to help you, like I said, be competitive and try to get a job for Marvel or DC or something. But, you know, the problem with that is it's very dismissive. I think if you go to someone that's in some kind of authority and ask them for some kind of critique, because they're only doing it like anybody else would, from their own lens, from their own view. They're not seeing the art as you do, they're seeing it as how they would do it. And of course, they being, quote unquote, I'm doing the air quotes right now, professionals. And, very rarely do the professionals ever get critiqued themselves. And when the professionals do get critiqued, they usually don't like it. They'll complain about what someone said about them getting criticized. Of course, I'm not going to mention any names. I don't need any of that kind of hassle getting into beefs with people. But the idea is that, you know, as the artist, what you're trying to do, you should be able to do with your own vision. You shouldn't have your vision tampered with people trying to criticize you. Now, me, when it comes to criticism, can I take it? It depends. It depends on the source. It depends on the way it's given. If someone wants to give me constructive criticism and say, well, if you did it like this, it would be easier, it would look better. All right. But the problem is when you, I mean, I always consider myself my harshest critic. And I know it's not true, because I'm sure that there are people that are just willing to savage my stuff. But if you offer me criticism, I'm pretty sure, I'm willing to bet 70, 75, 70 to 75% of what you could say to criticize my stuff, I had already thought of. It's already occurred to me. And there is just sometimes some things that you have to let go because you did the best you could at that time. When it comes to art, I always say, you know, vehicles, cars, things like that are the bane of my existence. Now, the idea for me is to try to do the best I can, given the framework that I have, to try to render something like that as best as I can. I play to my strengths. I don't try to, you know, get a touchdown where I think I can only get a field goal. I do the best I can with the situation I'm in. And, it comes out as it comes out. I mean, I might work on something for a day. I might work on something for a week. It might take longer than that. But at the end of the day, I have to make a decision that that's the best I could do with that aspect of the art. And I have to move on because, again, it's my art. And I can't just farm it out to someone else and say, well, draw me a car. I don't know if I can do a car as good as Joe Blow down the street. So I got to get somebody else to draw a car. Well, it's not really my car then because somebody else drew it. And to me, as the artist, I wouldn't do that. I can't do that. Um, it's almost like people want to use AI as a complaint or something. Well, the AI is doing all the work for you. Well, in a way, if you're hiring other people to do something that, you feel like you can't do, what's the difference between that and AI? Because you're basically saying, I'm not going to do this art. It's like, it's like Michelangelo going down the street and telling Leonardo to come in and fill in for him and do the right side of the Sistine Chapel under the arch or something. It's not his anymore then. He had to have created it himself. I know he had workmen work on things for him, but I mean, the design had to be from him. Otherwise, it's not his. And, you have the same thing when it comes to writing, when you're writing. And for instance, I know that I would probably be criticized for having too many word balloons in a panel. Now, when you're trying to do dialogue exposition, and you're trying to, because at some point in every story you're going to have a exposition dump, and you kind of can't get away from that. You can have various ways of it coming off more natural than others, and I've always tried to make it as natural as possible. But the dialogue dumps are going to be, and because I don't want to stretch them out for page after page, they're all going to be within one or two, maybe three panels that'll have like at least 3 word balloons of, perhaps 20 plus words. A lot of people would say you don't do it that way, but in the situation I'm in, that is the best way to do it. And sometimes you have to, you know, kick against the goads or whatever the old saying is, because you have to include this information. You have to include it where you have to include it. And you have to make sure it's done in a way that's concise, that it gets all out at one time. So you don't have to go back to it and say, well, remember when we were talking about this? Oh, yeah, this is something else that goes to that. You can't do that. You have to do it all really in one dump. And in a certain way, it's better to do it that way than to try to get cutesy and pretend that you can do it all. And that's why I feel like comics these days are very simplistic. I mean, I'm sure there's some that do it the way I do it, but I try to tell a story, and it's not just mindless action and then a couple of, you know, coherent dialogue scenes and then back to, some kind of 18-page action scene. That's not the way I do it. I try to give a full story. And as we said before in the last video I did, the most recent story, Against All Odds, has more than its share of action. But again, you have to take time to make sure that the plot is outright and explained thoroughly. I think a lot of people cut corners with that because they want less dialogue balloons. They don't want that many talky scenes, and you don't want too many talking heads, but you kind of have to explain what's going on. And that's why when you say graphic novel, that's what I think of. I think a graphic novel should be a novel, but you are showing what is happening. You know what I mean? There is the novel aspect of it that people want to forget about. They don't want to have to take the time to break down a scene and talk about the plot and have the characters interact that way. But that's very important. Another thing is lettering. Now, a lot of people would probably say I shouldn't letter the books the way I letter them. And again, maybe they're right, but that's the way I can do it. That is the only way I can do it right now. I can't afford to go farming it off to other people. And I think you get the idea. In this day and age, when people are on social media all the time, they've become accustomed to reading tweets and posts and whatever, and you can generally get the tenor of what is being said. Now, I still have the underlined word here and there for emphasis, but I don't go out of my way to do that, because you have to understand that people are not stupid. A lot of times, a lot of publishers or editors or whatever, they take for granted that the reader is not of average intelligence. I'm of the mind that my readers are smart enough to kind of know the tenor of the dialogue and what's being said. Like I said, will underline a word maybe for emphasis, where maybe the classic letterer would bolden it, but, or italicize maybe something. But I think that the same approach, doing it the way I do it, is still going to get the message across. Now, is it going to be fancy schmancy, highfalutin looking? Probably not. But again, like I said, the object is criticism. You could tell me all this. All this has already gone through my mind. All this I've already decided if I can live with it, if it's a concession I'm willing to do, if it's something that I think the audience, the reader, will be able to understand and, accept. That's kind of all you can do. And then the other, whatever, the other 30, the other 25% of a critique is probably, at least in my view, from what I've seen, most of the criticism from, people trying to critique a book or a comic or something usually boils down to, this is not the way I would do it. And again, that's kind of that's not your voice. If you're the artist, your voice has to come through. You can't just say, well, I wouldn't do it like that. I would have this guy do this and say it this way and do this. Well, then you're kind of losing the originality of what you were trying to do as an artist. Now, granted, there are some things that maybe for um, complexity's sake, you can make things a little less complex. I've tried to do that more in recent years. You try to say something, instead of using 30 words, maybe try to say it using 15. All right, I can understand that. But there's also like a poetry in dialogue. Dialogue has to sound right. And while people could say, well, you could have said this more simply, or you could have done this well, it might not sound natural if you do it a way that would be more uh, economical, or perhaps a little less purple prosy. But you kind of have to have that natural feel, the cadence, the rhythm of the dialogue. That's very important to me anyway. And again, it's the same thing with the art. Some people could say, well, this has to look like a certain way. Well, no, it doesn't, because if you're doing art a certain way, you're not going to stand out from everything else. Because I mean, the way that, like, panel layouts, I try to do panel layouts very um sort of old school. I don't try to get very fancy where there's, like, side panels that go from top to bottom, and then you have difficulty trying to see which panel goes next. I try to stay away from all that, because then you're sort of following the trend, whatever other people are doing. And I think what we really should be doing is going back to the original style of comics, which were, simple enough to follow. And that's sort of my view on it. Now, you could tell me in the comments below, what do you feel about criticism? Do you think you can gain anything from having your stuff critiqued? Do you feel like, in a way, it's just, my estimation of it is sort of like the biblical proverb of, don't try to take a speck out of your brother's eye when you have a beam in your own. Because most of the people that are criticizing, they don't take criticism very well, because a lot of people will criticize their books. I could take, and this is what I mean about, even when I was a kid, I mean, I would take like a Spider-Man book, and there was an artist that I didn't really care for very much. And I would say, why does the art look so bad? Now, maybe 1,000 other people didn't think that way. And the guy happened to get a job working for one of the biggest companies on one of the biggest characters. But to me, it still looked bad. And it could be just your take on it. Maybe it just didn't hit right for you. Maybe it hits right for somebody else. It's probably hitting right for a lot of people if they have that kind of success in that industry. But then again, you break it down, and you can, I mean, I could do this today with, prose, quote unquote, right now. I could open up a book and tell you what doesn't work for me in art, in the coloring, in story structure. Does that make me right? Does that make me wrong? I mean, it's just opinion. And that's why I say all art is subjective. Now, again, it could be something that you need, um, sort of to set you on the path to try to be a little more, you know, uh, uh, I think you do need to be a little, sort of, your own critic. You know what I mean? You have to be your own editor. You have to be able to see things. And some people can't do that. And I can understand that. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think it's wrong for you to have another pair of eyes on something that you're working on, especially if you've been working on it, alone for a long time. Some things can get past you, story wise, or a piece of art not being that clear that you don't really understand what's happening. But again, for the most part, I feel like the art should come somewhere from within, and you shouldn't really be depending on others' approval. I think that's very important, that you don't depend on others' approval to say, well, this guy says it's pretty good, so it must be pretty good. Well, if you looked at that guy, he might not really have that much talent either. He is, successful, but does his work for everybody? It probably doesn't. And in the same way, what you're doing probably will work for a lot of people, even if it doesn't work for him. So that's just something to chew on because, again, like I said, this topic comes up all the time. And I feel like people make this into some kind of a test. Like, oh, can you take it? Like you're supposed to take it. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, who told you that you have to criticize people? And who told you that the people that you criticize have to take it? I mean, you know, if you're an artist, you're trying to satisfy your vision more than the audience. I mean, that's pretty much the way I've always seen it. If you're an artist, you have to create something that is satisfactory to you, and you hope that you can get others excited for it. You hope that you'll be able to pass on that enthusiasm through the project, and people will pick up on it, and they'll feel like this is something worth getting excited over because the person creating it is got a lot of enthusiasm and they're really showing a lot of care for their product, their project. And like I said, I think that's very important. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think comic book criticism is very important, or do you think, like me, it's kind of less than important? Do you think that your self critiques are more satisfactory in the long run, or do you think you need someone that's been in a higher office to give you the critiques? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment on the subject here, or check out one of our more recent videos. We've got a couple of videos up now from the Superman and Fantastic Four reviews. We also have my Against All Odds release party video that we did just earlier today. And we're going to try to get some more different kinds of videos out here for you and see that the channel will grow substantially. If I can keep this pace up, maybe we'll see some more productivity in the future. Okay, and so until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.